Hello, and welcome to RevOps Live, the podcast where we explore the fast changing world of revenue operations and its impact on modern organizations' businesses. I'm your host, Mike Nee, CMO of Openprise, the RevOps data quality company, and today we have an extraordinary episode lined up for you. Joining us is a real leader in building effective RevOps organizations, Jacki Leahy, the visionary founder of Activate, the Magic, and fractional RevOps advisor. Jacki, you have such an interesting background and perspective on what actually works these days when building an effective RevOps team. Not just organizations, but what are the characteristics, the leadership styles, and some of the personal kind of EQ that really makes this effective. So I would love for you to take a minute to share a bit of your background so folks get a sense of where your perspective is coming from.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm a former kindergarten teacher. And I think if anybody really wants a crash course in how to be an operator,
I
just go
don't
ahead
share
and
well. I still don't share well. Come on. I need some help.
but really all of the systems and operations and reinforcement that needs to happen in a kindergarten classroom. I did not know it at the time, but I was really getting myself ready for a career in revenue operations.
I love it. And from our conversations, what I love is you not only bring the depth of experience of what's working in building these organizations, but that understanding of human elements that drive successful RevOps transformation, which is with the role of really driving that alignment, getting people to share their toys. I guess is such an just increasingly important part of it. So today we'll be deep diving into one of those areas that jumped out for me from our latest State of RevOps report, and for which you, Jacki, are the perfect guest. The evolving organization that is RevOps, and what implications does that have to how do you lead this org? And for those who are just starting your ops career, or building a functional team as its leader, certainly highlighting some of those skills that you'll need to navigate these challenges. So, let's begin with a couple of statistics on the state of RevOps to just set the stage. The survey, Jacki, I know you read it, but let me just put things out for the audience. Companies are not unified in their definition or degree of investment in RevOps. In fact, 35% of B2B companies only 35% have a formal RevOps department at all. And the fragmentation is only further emphasized by just, when we talk about the various ops teams, just who they report to, and only 20%. And that's like the high of these teams who report to either marketing, CMO, or the CRO. And the rest are dispersed, 10% here, 10% there, to all the other executives, the CFO, even the CEO. So just a couple more data points, and then let's get into it. One, while arguably sales ops came first, and being the CMO, I would actually say marketing ops seems to be a much more fleshed out organization with a wider range of titles. We talk about the people responded, just a broader range of senior to more junior folks. In fact, if we use that as a proxy for team makeup between sort of marketing ops and RevOps, and this is from sort of the RevOps co-ops and MoPros communities, RevOps teams were a little top heavy, I would have to say. 60% more senior leaders than from proportion than sort of the marketing ops teams. And the inverse is true for marketing, which is they have 430% more individual contributors who responded to the survey than in RevOps teams. And I thought this was an interesting stat, Jacki. I mean, any quick thoughts before we get into some of the questions and just some of the stats I just put out there?
Well, I think it really speaks to there's a gap in skills and experience on the market. There's a bunch of us who are kind of certified unicorns, right? Where we can we can wrangle chaos and get different people to the table and align and drive change and initiatives. And the people who are really good at it are amazing at it, right? And so companies really want them around. So I think VP of Revenue Operations is such a good catch-all title for the person who does all the things that actually makes a company go brrr. Right? It's almost like a chief of staff type position where it's like someone who is truly committed to the cause and the rocks and the OKRs and lives to undo friction and get people to the table and make progress happen. So we're like the what do you call it in football, who are just like, we're going to get it to the next line. We're going to get it to the next line.
Yep.
looking for an opening to toss it into the end zone. And I think, we're probably elder millennials, like the older half of millennials. We grew up with like Windows 95.
Taking us back. All right. Don't age me. Don't age
I know,
yourself. I'm
right?
telling you.
Yeah. But, I think we've learned a lot about wrangling, the baby boomers and our
Yeah.
younger millennial friends. And I think we know how people tick, and we know it's important to them. And being great with people means you can get done and get things
Yeah,
to happen.
well, and I think that I was joking a little bit about RevOps being a little more top heavy, but I
Hmm.
think it's actually really reflective of the fact that they are in a role which
Hmm.
is really around driving alignment versus sort of the more specific tasks where the campaign ops that marketing has, and that
Yes.
gets a little bit into what I'm hearing from even like the other ops folks who are not in RevOps. Their promotional paths, where they see greatest impact, is actually in RevOps because their role is around that alignment. So, just a couple other facts, and we'll get into the questions. I love this, which is, 50% of RevOps leaders are actually hired externally. It's just driving a significant influx of new ideas and expertise, and that momentum behind RevOps is undeniable. Over 38% of companies plan to increase their investment in RevOps headcount, and just 4% indicating any decrease. And this was at the end of last year, where already we were seeing, where this economy is going. So people are certainly investing forward, and these findings underscore the complexities and opportunities within this RevOps landscape and setting the stage for our definition. So our discussion. So let's dive into a couple questions. Hey, from your perspective, where is the state of RevOps today? I know a broad one, but we'll start there.
I think we have, a limited number of people who know what we're doing when it comes to RevOps. And depending on the size of company that
Yeah.
we kind of grew up in or are oriented towards, what RevOps actually entails can be wildly different. So it's less of a collection of skills, but an assortment of hats that the Swiss Army knife and people person happens to steward. And what it looks like from the outside looks totally different if you're at a startup or at an enterprise public company. But at the core of it, you're bringing people together, you're unblocking constraints, right? It's the same sort of business building efficiency obsession, finding a better way every day.
And what's interesting, the thing you said about we are such a different, each organization is different right now.
Yeah.
In fact, we work with a bunch of ops teams, and we certainly see the spectrum where you're just starting, you start getting more siloed as different teams support their specific ops. Then you start getting to a level of federation, right, where you're starting to coordinate, and maybe one of the roles. I remember one of my companies, the CFO actually had RevOps, but it was a smaller team, and sales and marketing had, 10, 20 people each in our ops teams. But they actually helped create sort of that broad federation of how we set shared priorities, even as we execute in each area. And then, of course, centralization, VPs of GTM strategy, ops. I mean, when you think about that maturity and the state, I mean, where do you see, your makeup nowadays, where people are at on that spectrum and the companies that you're working with?
I think what's happening right now is society is waking up and bucking the corporatism that we've been fed, right? Like this isn't
Right?
capitalism. This is corporatism. And it's bad for human it no, we don't have to take it anymore, right? So I think a lot of that is happening, and there's a lot of uncertainty.
Yes.
SaaS funding has really dried up, and since it's a closed ecosystem, we're all selling things to each other, and cash draw like the whole economy like comes down, and then a little cash go and then go up. Since we're so intertwined, um, so when economic headwinds happen, which they are right now, I think people get scared and
Right.
people want to hold on to their jobs, hold on to the responsibility, fiefdoms, silos,
Yes.
and it's really just human nature. Like I don't want to get fired. I don't want to lose my health insurance. So like everything would lead to silos. Like why would an executive team actually trust each other?
And so many of these operational initiatives actually look much broader than your own silo. And why stick my head out? And so
Yeah.
we are seeing a lot more tactical projects as well. And
Yeah.
what can I fix in my area to make me look good? How do I bring some of that insight? And maybe if it's demanded, we start bridging between the two. But
Yeah.
certainly we see the mix of organizations. But when you think about how you, let's go to the next question then. When you think about how you define RevOps, what is your core definition for that? And how do you reconcile between what you think are some of the other definitions we're seeing kind of popular out there?
Yeah. Well, how I look at RevOps is probably going to be a lot more systems heavy than someone who's proficient RevOps at a bigger company,
Mm-hmm.
because there's just like at a bigger company, the cake batter of your job is going to be a lot of diplomacy.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've literally gotten 4 million in funding and you have to show triple this year, there's not a lot of like strategy or aligning happening. There's 25 people and you've right, and you're trying to make something out of nothing. There's not a lot of like diplomacy to be had. It really is about making the most out of the technical and human spending that you have. So it really is debugging constraints, like very technically, very process oriented. And so it's very rarely about like, oh, we like this person better than that person. Sure, but at the end of the day, a personality hire isn't going to bring home the bacon, and there's nowhere to hide in a smaller team. So there's just not as much diplomacy needed.
Right.
There still is diplomacy, like you still need that in the batter to be a good RevOps cake.
Well, it's funny. I remember speaking at a conference, and just before me was Marlin Equity, and they were talking about, hey, these are 10 initiatives when we take over a large company that operations really releasing a huge amount of enterprise value. We talked about how you actually deliver on those things, and right after me, it was a VC firm, and they said, actually, even in Series A, we bring in an ops person because it gets a little bit to that definition. It's not just around an administrator, right? It's not just the operational piece of this. It is, how do you think about the strategic piece of it, like the planning and strategy, and what business model do we really have? And giving that insight. Yeah, that person can help administer the instance early on and make sure that you set up for growth, but also make sure that you set up for growth in the heads of your executives so they know what's really driving your business. And I think that was a really interesting view of like operational versus strategic views of what ops really does. And of course, you get narrow to broad. I mean, are we just talking about sales and marketing, which is so often the starting point? How are we start getting CS, finance, right, and some of the other pieces of this? Are there any different definitions you're seeing out there, and what are the implications of that to you as an individual or individuals out there who are thinking about their own operations roles?
Yeah. Well, I hear a lot like people, process, and technology as the three
Right.
pillars of RevOps. And then it's like, okay, but what about data and BI? What about this? What about that? It's like, well, sure. And if your company is at a space where like BI is really needed, then sure, you can wrap that into like people, process, and technology.
Although our reliance on data and technology have increased, so the role is actually getting more important. And you're a woman
Right.
after my own heart, by the way, Jacki. I'm just going to say that people process technology, data has been the missing component. And this is actually one of the differences I was going to bring up, which was
Mm,
data versus process. Certainly, people are process, and therefore you get technology. And sometimes ops will talk more about the people and the planning, but
mm,
really, what they're really looking at is how do I think about the data? Which
mm.
is my data GTM ready, or is my data even AI ready? Increasingly, is the question. And I
Oh,
think that's
yeah.
something that we talk about the definition of the role. The reconciliation is that the strategic, the broadening, but also the data aspect, which is now shared across your whole GTM your go-to-market
Yeah.
motion, is absolutely becoming key to the roles, at least to what we're seeing.
I like to talk about, especially when I'm with sales leaders, what I'm doing is getting you a dashboard so you can fly a plane in inclement weather. Like get you to a point where you can really rely on your instruments. And of course, you have a gut feeling and you're an amazing sales leader, but there's going to be a point where you can't possibly know what's going on with every deal and every rep, right? And you're going to evolve in your career where you're managing people who can no longer know what's happening in every deal. So building the trust and alignment that not only are you looking at a dashboard that's the truth, that's accurate, that leadership actually believes is what matters, right? Like we can all be tracking towards something, but we know when it's a stupid vanity metric. We can pretend all day, but like number of LinkedIn followers from my company account does not matter. And you can't convince
Yes.
me otherwise. You
But
can
you already
comp
hit the
me on
point.
it,
Yep.
but I'll take the money.
But you
You're
hit the
so
point
dumb.
before, Jacki. I mean, the economy is actually putting additional pressure where actually people are trying to figure out how to position themselves. And this is where that, do you have someone who can help people make them share better, right? How does RevOps really get to this next question, which is, why do we see this misalignment? And you hit, I think, the first one, which is I have siloed goals, objective functions, but also a lack of just a shared view of the truth. I mean, one of my conversations with one of our sales leader at one of our prospects was, he's like, one of the biggest issues he's dealing with is he owns account managers now. He actually owns the idea of growth. This is not just about net new sales, which is getting harder right now, especially in technology. I have to know how to grow because so much of the growth is going to come from my install base as well. And it's a whole new set of metrics for him. Like, how does he think about the funnel? Who is actually giving him that view of how he should be thinking about his business and be trusted, not just by him, but by CS, by marketing as well, so that it is now a shared view and getting everyone to the same page. Are we in the same sandbox? Can we actually share our buckets and figure out how we pass that along? So it's such an interesting view. But when you see misalignments, I would love to hear how you think about where they're coming from. Why do we still see this misalignment? The economy being one of them. What else do you think?
I think people are afraid to admit they don't know what's happening. Like we spend all this money on, oh, I bought Clary, so forecasting pipeline handled. It's like, who's going to be the first to admit that the data is actually probably not clean and anything that it's spitting out probably is super skewed?
Yes.
Who's going to be the first to admit that? Because until someone admits that, we're all pretending, right? Like if I'm scared for my job and I'm a marketing leader, I'm going to bang all day about, well, we sent you those SQLs, right? And sales
Right.
over here looking at their dashboard, well, we didn't, right? We did XYZ. Like everyone's pointing at each other, and it's like, who's going to admit that actually I don't know what your definition of an SQL is? Like, but no, really, can we talk about what the definition is? Can we align on that definition? Like that takes so much courage and audacity to be like, actually, I have no idea what's actually going on here. Can we talk about it? Like, do you know that there is a definition of churn? Like, it has to be decided on.
Yes.
Like, it's not just the number that pops out of Salesforce, right? It's like, no. Not only what the vibe is, but like what the definition is and what's the technical composition of that metric and the pipeline of the data that goes into that. And it's like, when I can get leaders to actually admit that they have no idea what's happening, magic happens. Because it's like, great. Let's do a data dictionary.
Yes. Well, I'm so with you. And I think this is what gets back to a little bit of what's kind of actual for an ops person, which is there are these different tech stacks and processes. Yeah. And frankly, you could even help folks not have to admit how much they don't know by saying what we do need to know is where are these handoffs points? What are the standard kind of alignment points? And therefore, what's the definition that is, when's the last time the market should be looking at MQLs versus what type of bookings were we able to actually move towards, right? And get rid of some of the change the metric versus even saying the marketing guys were piling up the vanity metrics. So it's interesting. How do you actually drive those conversations, take on processes? How do you think about the regular alignment meetings and kickstarting those workshops? I think are things that we see as ways for ops to start claiming sort of their authority to help get people out of this, fragmented pile up and actually be an equal voice. It's sort of like sales marketing, Democrats and Republicans. I do not say which one are which, by the way. I'll be in a lot of trouble if I did that. But you need the independent press. You need the ops folks to be in the middle and actually call and help people really see what the issue is versus the ideology.
And yes, 100,000,000%. And the strength and the potential of that neutral party to really be the custodian of the highest and best for the company, right? To be that custodian, they're only as strong and capable as the company culture, as the CEO allows.
And I love the fact that Sangram over at GTM Partners says where RevOps needs to report to is the CEO, right? Who actually owns your GTM,
yeah,
right?
Yeah,
and certainly it was interesting to see 10% had actually put RevOps to the CEO. But let's talk a little bit about that enablement. Like you said, how do we make sure that the culture, which is so often connected to organizational structure? So this question is really, and how does organizational structure and leadership impact alignment in RevOps?
What we're actually craving is like leadership, like people who own who they are and own their brilliance, and hire people who are smarter than them, like committed to hiring A players, and A players who are committed to hiring A players. As soon as like the popularity gets into the water, and popularity based on like almost bullying, like I see it over and over and over. It's like it has like the bro quality, especially of companies that are very like sales culture focused, which, I mean, the growth at any cost was like basically a case of Natty Light. Like, who do you think's gonna show up to your party?
Okay, we all built up some bad habits during that time because we were actually pushed to. Our boards pushed us.
Yep.
I mean, and the culture actually permeated.
Exactly.
And we're unwinding that now.
Yes, exactly.
Great time for ops, though. Great time for ops.
Great time for ops. I think it's a great time for bootstrapping. I think it's a great time for, I think we've naturally swung towards sustainable growth.
Yes.
And I don't know, profit margins. And I don't know, like upsell, cross-sell.
Wow. What words are those? I think I heard of that. That was like 5 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah. There's like
5 years ago.
There's such a need for responsibility at the top. There's, first-time founders. They're right, like are they okay? Right? Because I don't think they are.
Well, I mean, I think the good thing is that the focus on efficiency and the focus on efficient growth, so it's sustainable growth, the balance of it all is having everyone take a step back and eat some humble pie, right? What is really driving the overall growth behind this? And that does bring the opportunity to think about, how does organizational structure and leadership really, how do you play with the elements, whether you're small or getting mid-size or larger? Do I centralize or not? We talk about maturity, how independent do you make it? But also you talk about the hats you wear. You can't but sometimes wear certain hats because you actually are sitting in certain seats. Like the CFO, right? Certainly comes with the strategic planning, the ability to actually connect to the business metrics to make sure that ops is actually focused on the things that potentially move the needle. But increasingly, we know that the speed of movement and the need to think about data and process now is increasingly distributed. And so how do you deal with that trade-off? I mean, when you think about these trade-offs, how do you think about the different organizational structures, the CRO versus the CFO? Why is the CMO? And I feel very excited about that because I feel like I have the right skills, maybe not the right style.
Yeah,
Why don't I own RevOps?
Going out of style, man.
Oh, don't even go there. That's a whole podcast.
I'm so sorry.
Or therapy session for me, man.
I know. Let's talk about that after.
Absolutely. I need help. I need
That'll
help.
be you have to subscribe for the premium content.
I am going to say it will be a temporary blip. At least that's my hope. Hope is not a strategy, but I'll keep saying it until I
Okay.
actually get it through. All right, but think about
All right.
RevOps. I mean, you are seeing the CRO, and certainly we all have seen where the CRO is still just head of sales, right? And
Yeah.
again, it gets back to, is it really a peer between sales and marketing? If the CRO actually has all the functions and ops is now a peer across sales marketing, that structure makes sense to me, right?
Yeah.
Again, is there a couple things that you see that really, especially as an ops leader, you need to be thinking about, and what problem you're solving? Therefore, what ops organization or which hats you want to align yourself to would make the most sense?
I think RevOps can't be afraid of getting fired by the CRO because they didn't add a pick list value fast enough.
Okay, so they have to step up from being just an administrator. Okay, got it.
But that's easier said than done.
Oh, the pressure is insane. We all felt it.
And like sales leaders are really good at getting you to do things that they want you to do.
And I've had to walk a year and a half of running sales, and I understand the quarterly focus, and the hat really makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
So the ability to think forward versus having to be this quarter, and whose butt is hanging out the window with their sellers,
Right.
on
And
a
we
week-to-week,
need
month-to-month
that.
basis.
And they're
You need it.
beautiful people, and we absolutely need them. But they can't have all the keys to the nuclear codes.
Although they wish they do, and they certainly bluff up as if they did.
They'll convince you. Don't trust the CRO. They mean well.
I would say there's two types of CROs. I mean, let's just be clear, because there are certainly some range of CROs that we really see rising that actually have the functions across.
Yeah,
but
there's
really,
definitely there's a craving for that.
That's right.
Responsible, like chief revenue officer, right? Being
and a CEO who's willing to give up that function, right? Because you really are thinking now about how the CEO separate itself out from the revenue angle. But it's really interesting because you talk about different inflection points and how it scales. Yeah. But I mean, when you think about this kind of alignment, what do you think if you were in your ops role internal to a company, and how should you think about who you work for? Is any type of guidance here, and how does that change sort of the angles you want to take? Besides run from a CRO who only has sales.
You know what? I had to do that to get where I am. I think there's a lot of like pressure to put like the glossy spin on it, like work-life balance, and like no. Let's be real clear, Michael. I went through hell. I went through hell to get where I am. Like it is not glamorous. It is not pretty. I've had temper tantrums in closets. Right? The amount of times that I had to like escape a meeting to cry in a bathroom stall, right? Like I went through some really toxic situations, and sometimes the chapter in life calls for a bullshit situation. And so my advice is to know what chapter you're in. Like for that chapter, I knew I am in a chapter of learning.
Yeah.
My season of earning will come later. Like that's not right. And
or planting or harvesting. Like there is certainly an investment time where RevOps is really just getting the core, educating the leaders of the company to really start understanding and start sharing. Like let's start with a couple shared metrics, and ops really kind of doing things behind the scenes to help bring that to fruition. So absolutely, I get your point. That's a good one.
But if you're like, if you are wanting a career in RevOps and you're navigating that, what to look for, go learn from people who blow your mind.
And actually, so many people underestimate the amount of change management and that EQ element that RevOps has to bring to the table. I mean, on one side, clearly, we talk about the future trends. I mean, cross-functional skills, understanding functional touch. I mean, these are all things you can learn as you build up your skills, right? Your data literacy, increasingly getting closer to like the CFO as your friend to understand the metrics. But really, like communication collaboration is such a key part of fostering a collaborative culture. And how do you build that? How do you prevent the CFO from coming in and say, hey, sellers, why aren't you guys generating as many leads? And all of a sudden, like sales and marketing actually are just broken because everyone's now playing games again. I mean, it's so easy to break a
Oh
culture
my gosh,
with
it's
just one or two
so easy to
words?
break. One bad hire. Like, it is so tenuous. And I think like that's the work of leaders right now. That is the work for leadership right now. Like lowercase leadership. It's going to take all throughout the business. But like even more is the executive team really being that like we've got each other. Like no mutiny goes down, right? We're one. We're not going to pit teams against each other and fight for fiefdom.
And an executive, and choosing your executive of who you can align to, or know you have more than a couple who can be aligned to this purpose, so key. But
Yeah.
let's get back to how can RevOps teams align to the go-to-market teams. And we were just trying to touch on part of this. Like, what are the insights that ops folks should be looking for that would be nice to share as they think about creating that alignment?
Well, I think ops people overestimate what their brilliant solutions are.
No, I mean, execution is. I mean, yes, I'm with you.
Yes. So there's like there's such a shift that has to happen from, oh, I have an internal customer, internal stakeholders, da 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 da. No, you're a product manager.
Yes,
Like the
I could agree more.
reputation of you and your department and everything you do is everything. And you build up goodwill as aggressively as possible because you know you're going to F it all up and they're going to come for you with pitchforks. The only thing saving you from the pitchforks, and some of those pitchforks, like there is necessary friction. There are times
Yes,
where
you
you're
said stand
going to
up.
upset people. It's
That's right.
happening. It's coming down the pike. So it's like people need to know that you're on their side. You understand them, that they're heard. Like we want to like be inventors so much more than like sometimes you just have to be a therapist.
And by the way, that is spot on. I remember one of my first big gigs, we had a change manager person sitting in the room, and he opened my eyes from not just being about the brilliant solutions, but who's really on board. Did you really see where people were at, and how did you need to have a conversation? What were they really interested in? How are you really driving change? And I hate to say it, but change management is important in this case, and being effective around it. But what are some of the tactics? If there's a couple things that you've seen actually work, we talked a little bit about driving like a shared analytics or workshop, so that we can
Yeah.
start getting to what metrics that really matter for the business. Like, do you have a couple things that would help align GTM teams that you've seen really work?
Something simple like a dictionary of financial terms that we're going to be using, especially if you're new, if you can come in like, listen, I'm pretending I'm an alien and I'm going to actually be an anthropologist right now. Like I'm going to pretend I know nothing and I'm just going to learn this alien culture to like really put the hat on of like researcher. Simple things like doing a ride along. Like
Yes.
if your company's in person, like sit with the BDRs.
And make
Sit
sure
with
they
the
feel heard. I mean, that's
salespeople.
so important. And the documentation, I hate to say it, as many ops folks I deal
Mm.
with, documentation is something they hate. But they
It's
realize
not
that,
about the documentation, it's about making people feel safe.
yes. Well,
It
and so
doesn't
I would
matter.
also say feel heard as well, because it forces a
Mm-hmm.
conversation as well. Once
Yes.
it hits paper, so often people forget the power of putting it down on paper sometimes,
Yeah.
virtual
Yeah.
paper,
Yeah.
as sustainable as we are.
And showing your work as you're working,
Yes.
right? Like pretend it's fourth grade math, show your work. No, like there's actually negative points if you come out with something brilliant. Nobody wants your brilliance. They want to see you struggle.
Well, what I think is also interesting, and there's a soft side, but I'm going to throw one hard skill in there as well, which is I actually think where you have to find where your touchstones of strength are. Like in
Mm.
product marketing, I always talk about you have to just know how to accelerate the funnel. What are the things that you're the should know competitor, blah blah blah. RevOps, I mean, I find that if they know the data and they can help people understand how to leverage the data, because so many folks just forget about that on the revenue side. That becomes something you bring to the table uniquely. And how do you bring
Oh my
that
gosh, yeah.
aspect of data foundation and quality that now you can translate it to, hey, when your sales guys are going after this, we know these are the right leads or this, et cetera. like that. You have to find your pillars of strength that you can lean on, that
Yeah.
bring to the table to add value to any conversation as well.
And for the most part, I think a huge strength that RevOps people have is just sheer curiosity, right? So you might not love data, but you're curious enough to know to learn the skills enough so you can use the data, right? So like one of the most fun realizations I made when I was in-house at Link Squares was we thought we were selling to chief legal officers at companies. Turns out, after analyzing it, we had a much better close rate, faster close rate for VPs of finance. What?
And like you said, until you really start looking in there and being curious about it, and
Yeah.
just break through the assumptions. And so
And I
often,
couldn't just like
it
run and
happens.
tell. I couldn't just
Right.
run and tell the salespeople, right? I had to walk them through, like, okay, this is our like, look at the look at the data, look who we closed, look how long it took, and like give them the sandbox where they can discover their own insight. And it's like, yes,
Well, and that gets back to just for those starting their ops career journey, the skills and initiatives. I almost, I think about that world's most interesting man commercial. It's like stay curious,
yes,
right?
yes.
And certainly it gets back to what you also were implying, which was, when you think about the data, how do you actually force people to draw the conclusions? Because you have to bring them there. You can't just share it to them and
Mm-mm.
tell them at the end goal because they're not going to buy it. And they come from such different directions. You have to understand by forcing them to draw conclusions, you're now getting back to where they started, which is what's their set of truths that you can move them from. And like you said, increasingly, if you connect to the business objectives,
Yeah.
that to me, how do you make the CFO and bring some of that executive, guidance to the conversations, even as you think about the buyer journey. So, I think there's a lot of interesting things here. And I'm just going to reiterate one more thing you said, and I'm going to open it back to you. Network. This is a very fast moving market. And I think about those who are just, still very early days and figuring out, hey, what mistakes have you made here? What have you done here? And this is why communities like RevOps co-ops, marketing pros, like these are communities and influencers like folks who are leading like yourselves, who are
You can
really
say it.
seeing
You
a
can
lot of
say
those
it.
problems. I have to bleep that out. Am I allowed to say words like that? But I mean, I do think, stay curious. You certainly should be networking and sharing and asking for help from your community because they are all learning together and really connecting to the business objectives, even as, like Microsoft has to share the roof of the customer, come back to that customer experience because you can actually bridge the selling experience, buying experience, and the data and the processes that no one else can. And that's such a source of strength. I mean, just what do you think? Like, what are the other things you're telling folks who are just getting going or actually building their teams?
Um, I think shifting from trying to look awesome, shift it to you are now a celebrity talent agent.
Oh, nice.
And I make it my mission to get as many people around me promoted or score dream jobs, get raises. And when people know that that they actually want to go from VP of operations to COO,
Mm-hmm.
and you track back things that you're like, listen, I know this is important to you. This is a shift that I think moves you into that direction, right? All of a sudden they're like, oh, oh, Jacki knows. And if you can be that secret, like be other people's secret weapon, and you'll never be without a job, even if you want to be.
Those are universal words, by the way. Universal words. um, any parting thoughts on this one? We talked about a bunch of things. I mean, we really started touching upon pretty broadly as we went across just where orgs have evolved to, and really getting back to just the weight that really gets behind the person you bring to the table, and understanding the organization, the change that goes behind motivating individuals. What is their goals, even as much as you bring the shared company goals forward. Any final thoughts on this whole state of RevOps and what does it mean to the ops individual?
Make sure you build time in your schedule to work on your career and your network. It can sound silly, but put 5 comments on LinkedIn every morning will change your life. It'll change your
Well, I
life.
mean, absolutely that. And I'll say, actually, even just writing a little bit, blog some of your experience, because so many people are still learning from each other,
Mm-hmm.
but it also forces you to frame your thinking and just get it
Mm-hmm.
really tight. It will help you not only in terms of externally, but also internally, how to explain things, because you're getting it tight and being ready to speak to it at any point in time is also, to your point, part of the whole change management process
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
With that, like we said, in today's discussion, we've delved into essential skills and initiatives, what it means to be an aspiring RevOps professional, and just navigating this a little bit as we talk about continuous learning, robust professional networks. And so even as we bring this all together, as we set the stage for long-term success, I just want to thank you, Jacki, for joining us on this conversational journey, as well as the audience, and on just the state of RevOps. Stay tuned for the next RevOps live conversation. We will absolutely continue to explore the latest trends, strategies, and innovations shaping revenue operations. Until then, keep pushing the boundaries, driving experience in your RevOps endeavors, and share. With that, thank you, Jacki.
Thank you, Michael.